Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sticking around. We are very aware of the fact that this is the last panel of the day, and we are standing between you and happy hour, so we're going to try to make this as fun and informative as is possible, and we're really appreciative of your time. All right, so my name is Ramon Ramirez. I'm the managing editor of The Daily Dot. We cover internet culture. We've covered internet culture since 2011, so we've seen firsthand just how influential some of these memes and QAnon stuff has become, and happy to speak about that as much as possible, but also, if you want to know more, feel free to find me at the bar, and I'll talk your ear off then, and here I'll just try to be more of a moderator. This is Mark Fiore. He's one of the best political cartoonists in the game. He is also a fellow at Stanford University, and his work has appeared everywhere important. Who's next to my right here? Okay, this is Sammy. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, in The Onion. She's a senior writer at The Onion. Her work is hilarious, biting, insightful. She can turn, a riff about a seahorse into incredible, biting political satire. It's really wonderful work. And then it's my boy Paul from Georgia Tech, a professor, and he's written several books on basically the rise of the influence and the effect of satire across Latin America from TV to the YouTube generation. And then at the end, we have my friends, wait. Sorry. We have Sarah, right? Sarah. Jesus Christ. I'm terribly sorry for the rudeness, but Sarah is just one of the chief architects behind Reductress, which is one of the funniest sites on the internet. They just have a really awesome new book that you guys should check out. I think it's the kind of thing you got to have on your coffee table. So we're going to talk a little bit about the rise and the change. Well, you guys know what is this panel called? It's called the rise of. There we go. There it is. Political satire for the digital era, from animated cartoons to memes. Okay, so we're going to start with a presentation by Mark, who again accomplished satirist and has a lot to say on the matter. And Mark, please. Let's give it up for Mark. Let's go, Mark.
Thank you. All right, I think this is actually, it's a misnomer for the panel. I think it's actually called the happy hour panel. So let's keep it like that. Well, and I think probably soon maybe we can come and go, and people can get drinks and then come back and we'll keep talking. But so as you so kindly introduced me, I'm Mark Fiore, and I'm currently a fellow with the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford, which has been incredible, and I want to make that last forever. But it's not going to last forever. So let me tell you a little bit about my background, and I'm going to keep this short so we can have a conversation and have a lot of fun up here rather than me just yammering on and showing my cartoons. But we want to see some cartoons, right? So I started in the world of actual newspaper cartoons. That's a long, long time ago for me. And I was drawn into cartoons and into journalism through the love of cartoons. Everything from Calvin and Hobbes to Bugs Bunny and, Chuck Jones cartoons. Like, I just loved cartoons. But then I found these things called political cartoons, and I really started to love those. And that really brought about this awareness of the greater world, whether it was in the United States or around the world. And so really since being a kid, I was laser beam focused on being a political cartoonist. And so started, long time ago in the traditional, actual pre-internet days, doing cartoons on dead trees. And fast forward to, well, I'll start with one cartoon from just last year. So I'll show you what my cartoons became or have become.
Are you tired of explaining your unwavering support for guns amid constant mass shootings? Having a hard time selling people on slashing Social Security and Medicare? How's a good Republican supposed to explain all this stuff? Guess what? You don't have to, because you've got anti-woke everything. Skip that uncomfortable policy junk and stick to the culture wars. Look, a gay M&M. See how easy it is? All you need are a few unrelated issues and plenty of outrage, and you're on your way to anti-woke everything. Of course, you could try to explain how Republicans helped add $5 trillion to the debt when they gave rich people a huge tax cut. Or you could tell people Joe Biden is coming to take away their gas stoves. Congratulations, you're now an anti-woke cooking crusader. Anti-woke everything works great for toilets, light bulbs, bathrooms, fashion, fictional characters, books, and of course, plain old speech. Why talk about your unpopular policies when you can be outraged about candy, cooking, and cartoon characters? Anti-woke everything. Let the culture wars work for you.
So that's a little different from where I started with regular newspaper cartoons. And I got into doing cartoons like that mainly because it just felt to me like you could tap into people's brains a lot more than you could through a single panel cartoon. And I think whether it's animated cartoons or traditional single panel cartoons or memes or written satire, I think one of the beauty, one of the superpowers you might call it, is that it can help unlock people's walls or like make a window in that wall, whatever the metaphor is. There's an ability where almost all of us have some sort of preconceived notion, or you have some sort of wall that it's much easier to break through if you go through a point of humor or a point of cartoons. So, even though a cartoon like that, that cartoon probably takes, generally something like that's about 3 days on the production side to make, because you're dealing with voice actors and music and, actually animating the thing and sound and all kinds of things. So it adds up some time. But I still do single panel cartoons as well. And these are more in the, I love doing work like this still because it does allow you to do something in the blink of an eye. Not create it in the blink of an eye, but like receive it. You get that idea instantly. And here's the next one. Speaking of Haitian people in Ohio, that was when that came about. When this ties in with misinformation and disinformation, which we may get into in the Q&A or over by the bar, we'll see. So I will show one more animation and then we can keep rolling and get into more of a discussion. One of the other, talking about that superpower real quick before I show this one, one of the benefits of cartoons, at least to me and that I see in cartoons and satire more generally, is that it allows you to talk about things that are honestly really freaking depressing or really freaking tough. I think Luz mentioned it in the last panel, that even though you have this awfulness happening in the world or in your own country, you have to be able to laugh and you have to be able to find the hypocrisy in some of these things. And without that, we would go a little more nutty.
Attention Gazans! America is here to help. Look to the skies carefully. Look to the sea. Help is on the way. We can do it all. Who says we can't provide bombs and aid at the same time? Bombs for our close and admittedly over-the-top ally, and aid for our Palestinian friends because of the aforementioned bombs. Yes, we're a friend to all. Bombs for our ally who destroys water treatment plants, and water for civilians because their water treatment plants were blown up. Bombs for hospitals, medicine from above. Bombs for roads and trucks, aid from boats and a pier. If our bombs destroy aid routes, we'll just invent new routes. Malnutrition, starvation, disease, we're here to help after we hurt. Yes, we can help solve a humanitarian crisis of our own complicity. Because America can do it all. Our bombs don't kill people. Over-the-top allies using our bombs kill people.
Thanks. So whether it's the animated cartoons or the single panel cartoons, the kind of work that I do, and I think one of the biggest strengths of satire is the ability to actually say something. Like, I'm all for humor's sake, but it seems like what's really drawn me to this kind of work, and I think one of the biggest strengths of satire, is that you're actually saying something. It's more than just a ha-ha silly joke. And I think, some of the best memes and some of the best work that's, written satire, it isn't just funny. A lot of people look at a cartoon like that or the one that I showed you earlier, And they might say, haha, that's funny, but all of that work has to be based in fact. And, that's where you become more of a satirist, is where you push that a little farther past that point of absurdity. So I'll get off my soapbox now, and we can talk more with these guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. All right. Okay, so we're gonna roll right along and use the clicker, which we've got. Yeah, looks like it's there we go. All right, here we go. So look, as funny as Mark's work was, I mean, I think we all also watched it, and sometimes the news is so over the top depressing that it's really hard to find the strength to laugh. And I think that's kind of the era that we're in right now. So my question for the panelists, and we can just go one at a time, just hop in whenever y'all want. When did you realize that, I mean, the question is written, when did you realize memes were changing the world? But I guess really the question is, when did you realize that the internet was no longer funny? And why don't we start with Sarah?
I do not even remember the moment when memes are like the water that I swam in growing up. But I would say that when I realized memes were changing the world into whatever this world we're living in this very moment was probably around when I saw the Chad meme. Do you guys know what the Chad meme is? It's the guy with the blonde hair and the beard, and he always says yes. And it originated on the right. It was like a right-wing meme and has evolved into various forms. But I think the moment I saw people kind of more in the mainstream using the Chad meme, I realized things were changing in the meme world. Memes in the 2010s felt kind of broadly liberal, I would say. Just broadly liberal, maybe just because that was the zeitgeist at the time. And now that things have changed, we're seeing the memes take a different shape. And that was when I realized, oh no, memes can be quite dangerous in the way that they come from a place of with a very particular ideology and can filter into the mainstream and feel like it's just normal. So, yeah.
No, I had no idea. Did anybody know that the Chad meme originated on the right? I had no idea. I see that meme all day, every day. I had no idea. That's unbelievable. Okay, awesome. Paul, what about you?
Well, for me, it really wasn't memes that got my interest. I started with magazines. I was a young journalist in Peru in the late 90s, and then I was also studying literature, and I started reading magazines inspired, Latin American satirical magazines inspired by The Onion, by Charlie Hebdo, and I realized that they had these other possibilities that journalism felt that traditional journalism at the time felt insufficient to cover certain things that were already happening in Latin America. But really my academic interest in satire in general, from magazines to memes, I would say it started actually here in Austin 20 years ago when I came as a grad student to do a master's in journalism and Latin American studies. And in the journalism department, I was kind of one of the few people that actually started doing academic research on what at the moment was a very new and fresh phenomenon of satiric infotainment, satirical television, and The Daily Show apparently was the new journalism at the time. And I realized also that that kind of political entertainment or political satire or satiric journalism, I don't know, so many names that have been used for that, was actually a version of that in so many other contemporary democratic societies. And they were also, particularly in Latin America, that I focused my work on. There was a version of The Daily Show and other kind of formats in all those countries, but they became very Argentinian, very Peruvian, very Mexican, and they were becoming exactly what Latin American is, like a creator of hybrid products, no? So they took these global formats, transnational formats, and were adapting them to their local circumstances, to their local context, to their local historical processes, social, cultural, language, slang, cultural, popular culture, etc. No, so that's really when my whole interest began really developing also as a practitioner and as an academic. And so I do think that really understanding the layers that satire had and the possibilities, which I know have changed from then to now, had to really trying to understand the reality of the world, which at the end was at the time also, has always been, but at the time was, I think, much more a preoccupation for traditional media, no? So like traditional media was trying to understand and make sense of a reality that was becoming much more complex and much more entertainment-driven, and politics was becoming much more spectacle-driven, and I felt like the norms of traditional journalism sometimes were not enough or just we're not capturing all those dimensions. No?
So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by satire and what we say when we talk about satire. So, what exactly is satire, and how do you find its characteristics, particularly from the lens of your specific work? And Mark, why don't we start with you?
As far as satire goes, I mean, even though I can talk a good game about satire, I am still somewhat mystified by how it happens. You know, you actually were describing it really well in relation to memes, how, you know, what I took out of it anyway is that memes are not necessarily always satire. It's more like you're laying over these elements. Like, yeah, you might have SpongeBob, but I'm saying something else, and don't you get the joke that those two connect to that? It's almost like you're trying to map humor, and that's really freaking hard to do. But I think as far as satire, for me, it's really just seeing that absurdity that exists in reality and pushing it a little far. It's almost like you're showing people what the future might be, you know, what it could be, like the dolphin gag that I had in that cartoon. It's like, yeah, the dolphin we didn't actually employ dolphins, but really we weren't that far from doing that. You know, so that's kind of what I see as satire. But it's a tricky thing. I think it's still kind of this magic world that I don't understand entirely.
And Paul, okay, so your work has really focused on Latin America. What works, what doesn't when it comes to humor in Latin America, when it comes to satire in Latin America?
Well, I would like to go back to the definition thing, because that's actually for the research and the books that I've written about satire. I had to read many articles and books about the different definitions of satire throughout history in different cultures, in different places. I mean, of course, I picked the ones that I like the best, but one of them, one of the most traditional ones was, you know, a humorous verbal attack on human stupidity and folly, and what is perceived as dangerous political, social, and cultural views or of discourses. The one that I usually use in classes or in some presentations for other audiences is to create also the contrast between some more traditional comedy and satire, which is sometimes a difficult thing for a lot of people to grasp. And usually I try to explain is that sometimes, usually comedy in a more general sense, its final aim is to create laughter and to entertain or to create humor or to create laughter. With satire, it does have a critical component that usually is social, political, or cultural, and it's actually questioning some sort of version of reality. No? So I do think that's an important definition that I think helps people, and I think it goes through cultures. So I do think that definition applies to the U.S., but also in Latin America. But that I also think that's very elastic in the sense that what is transgressive or what is a verbal attack on the establishment or whatever it is changes from culture to culture. No, so I remember when I was writing about satiric television or even digital, but mainly with television because it's a different kind of platform and other kind of negotiations that satirists had to do within those media outlets. One of the things, and even with magazines too, that I thought was really interesting was that what could be perceived as something very transgressive and irreverent and disruptive in a moment in society, in one society, is something totally normalized in another one, and it changes through time, through places, according to their whole historical and cultural processes, no? and things that, like, for example, I remember I wrote about a case in Ecuador, and what they were doing I felt was very mildly subversive, according to my standards. But I do think that, for example, if you look at Argentina in Latin America, I think their satirical tradition is much more acid and much more irreverent and much more dark and politically incorrect even, no? So I do think it, and also depends on when, no? So I do think it's those kind of definitions of what works, what doesn't, what is satire and what is transgressive or what it is to speak the truth to power changes so much according to the context, the time, the culture, no? So I do think it's a very open, it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and Paul, you're talking about something interesting, but it's what works, what doesn't. And in the news business, we take something that works and we run it into the ground until it doesn't. I do that in particular with headline constructions. Here's a headline construction that works, and people respond to it, and you do it over and over and over and over again for like 100 years, and then eventually that headline construction doesn't work anymore, and then you have to find a new headline construction. So Sarah, what doesn't work anymore over at Reductress? What stopped working over the last few years?
What doesn't work anymore? Yeah, I would say there are certain sensibilities that have just kind of run their course that maybe I think felt more fresh in the 2010s, and a lot of it was kind of like, I think something that was part of the conversation at the time was kind of like learned helplessness in heterosexual couples, like men who are like, I don't know how to wash the dishes and things like that. So I think, we had a little fun with that for when it felt fresh and relevant. But, I think like anything, there's always this balance between trying to say something fresh, something new, something that is still punching up without feeling mean or kind of just like heavy-handed. And I think in editorial, you're always just kind of trying to balance that out between like what actually feels specific enough to be worth saying and what's just kind of like bordering on, just being unkind.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we bring it? Let's flash forward to 2025. So, Mark, it's 2025. President Donald Trump is starting his second term. What's changed?
You mean between 2025 and the previous term?
Well, yeah. What's different now, especially when it comes to your lens and your work?
It's getting hit from more directions, and I think really honestly the biggest, I mean, not to bring it down too much, but the distribution side, the business side has gotten much more difficult, and I'd be curious to hear what you all say about this too. But thinking back to 2016, think of all the different changes. Just looking at Facebook, think of all the different changes, the algorithm and the push. Okay, hey, it's going to be video. Yeah, we're going big on news. We're going big on politics. And then all of a sudden, it's like, no, we're actually tired of getting pulled before Congress. We're not going to do news anymore. It's about, interpersonal relationships and forming connections all around the world. And whatever the latest BS out of Facebook is, that affects everything. That affects online news sites. That affects, content creators like me. And I'd be curious how that kind of thing is affecting all of your work and getting it out there, because social media has been such a big avenue for that.
That's such a good point that we didn't even bake into the recipe, but it makes sense. It's satire. We were going to talk about how satire is dangerous because of the way it's been weaponized by folks on the right and the way things have really changed. But from a business perspective, just for context, the Daily Dot, January of 2023, January 23, we had 31 million clicks just from Facebook. Fast forward to January 2025, it's like 100,000. So that is a huge swath of money that we lost. Because does everyone know how to convert the value of your page views? It's actually super simple. And I know as journalists we are terrible at math and we don't like to think about the business side of things, but it's really straightforward. You take the number divided by 1,000, so the number of page views, so 30 million page views divided by 1,000 times the ad rate at the moment. And so the Daily Dot's January ad rate would have been $17. So 31 million divided by 1,000 times 17 is the amount of money that we lost monthly because Facebook just tweaked the algorithm. And now we're reliant on Google News and Google Discover. Google Search was a big deal 10 years ago, but now that's pretty much dying off with the rise of AI. So you're absolutely right.
It's always a challenge trying to stay relevant when there's so many talented people saying the things so quickly. And sometimes when a big news story comes out and we look at it, we hold back and say, let's keep an eye on it and see what people are saying about it, because another avenue for Reductress to comment on what's happening is what the media is saying about it, or what the media is doing, how the media is handling it wrong. And that can be really fun to play with too, because it is actually a lot. We will play with like headline construction and like, you know, especially in the 2010s, we were really trying to like take on the voice of clickbait headlines and really embody that voice. Respect though, hey, you gotta get attention, like it has to. But we still have a lot of fun doing that. And I think there's, you know, always a lot to say kind of on that second thought. Well, like Twitter has always been like a great place to find like the first best joke. You know, when we're at our best, we're reacting to the conversation as much as the original news story.
Well, I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, that one of the most popular memes on the internet, and I had no idea, and I think we used to have a whole like vertical dedicated to meme culture, and you know, teenagers would write us every day complaining about, you're killing memes. In other words, you're giving attention to these memes that are for us, and now you're making them mainstream and uncool. We dealt with that pretty much every single day. But what you said at the beginning was that the Chad meme, which is, show of hands, who knows the Chad meme? Where my Chad stands at? Where the Chad heads at? No? Okay. It's like, I see it every day on the internet. I had no idea it came from the right-wing internet. So why and when did humor on the internet become this young male conservative space for y'all? Or for all of us? Why and how did that happen? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Well, let me actually combine the previous question with this one.
Yeah.
Well, let me go back to two headlines that I remember I read from one when at the peak of the Daily Show. I remember there was this, I don't remember the magazine, and ran this whole piece asking, where's the conservative Jon Stewart? No? And they were making fun, they were actually kind of making a whole critique. Why is satire or humor always so progressive, so liberal, or that? No? Of course, there's a whole tradition of that might explain that leaning. But then, let me fast forward to 2016. I remember I read when Trump was just elected and his first term, there was this piece in the Washington Post, an op-ed, saying Trump has killed satire. No? And I think that in both cases, it's very revealing, those kind of anxieties of who owns satire, how can that be? And you know, I also feel like those kind of conversations and debates are sometimes very, or ethnocentric, or at least very time-centric in the sense that, you know, satire is such an old form that has existed through so much time. It's one of the earliest literary forms from so many traditions. So I do feel like it has been appropriated in many ways. And actually, with your question about who's trying to the young male conservatives, well, then again goes back to the definition. No, there are many books that actually say that probably wouldn't be satire, would be an appropriation of certain time of parody resources for humorous purposes that serve some sort of ideological view. But I don't know if you could call that satire itself, because as it was mentioned first, one of the main things that satire has usually had is not that punching up and that confrontation of power of the status quo, right? So I don't know if you could still define that as satire. No? So that would be, I think.
Well, so go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
If I could just jump in real quick, I think you hit on something perfectly there, is that it's getting appropriated. And I think this idea of satire being, you know, it's a left thing, and then, oh no, now the right's getting it. I don't think the right's getting it. And, you know, I'm probably, you know, I have my own views of, you know, what's factual and what's not. You know, unfortunately, that's a little grayer with some people. But I think what they're doing is, and it's classic Trumpism, too. It's like he'll say something outlandish and, like, ridiculous, then his administration will backpedal or attempt to backpedal, and then they'll come out and say, he was just joking. And I think what we're seeing with some of the more right-wing memes, you know, it's not satire. It's more of a wink. It's like, you think it's some white supremacist meme? You're like, don't you get a joke? You're like, no, that's not really a joke. Like, they're not connecting it to satire. It's more of a wink and a nod to people in that tribe. That's kind of what I would argue in a lot of that.
Absolutely. We talk about what is and isn't satire. Paul made a really good point that for it to be satire, we really do need to be punching up. And so a lot of what we're seeing from the right is appropriation, and it's people trying to be funny. It's Elon, like Sammy, you just hit the nail on the head. Elon Musk wants to be funny. That's been a through line of his forever. So, Sarah, has humor, has satire, how dangerous is that? Especially, not just from a cultural perspective, but from a business perspective, from what you have to work on and defend every day at Reductress.
How dangerous? I mean, I don't think that what I do is dangerous. I don't think that, satire has that kind of power. I think it's important for the historical record to show what we disagreed with on a fundamental level. But in the same sense, I don't think right-wing memes, as long as we're not, including actual hate speech, I don't think they're dangerous. From an editor's perspective, my usual critique is, one, is it punching up or punching down? And two, is it even specific or based in any kind of real reality? I'll use a Babylon Bee headline for an example. I think after...
for those who don't know, can you explain what the Babylon Bee is?
The Babylon Bee is basically the right-wing answer to The Onion. It started out as kind of like a religious, like a Christian parody site that got bought by a hard right editor, and it became just kind of like a mouthpiece for right-wing ideology after that. And actually, when it first started out, there was some really funny stuff because it was just based in, if you'd grown up in the church. It was kind of just making fun of that experience, and there was some truth to it. But, now not so much. And I think it was after, one of the plane that flipped recently, and the people on the right were, screaming because it was a female pilot, even though, 99,000 of the last plane crashes were by male pilots. And the headline was something about putting a tennis ball at the front of a plane so that a woman doesn't crash the plane. And it's to me, that says more about what they have been waiting to say. They've been waiting for an excuse to say it more than it is an actual reflection of reality, which is obviously more men have crashed planes than women, and there's a host of other reasons why it's not a reflection in reality. I think the danger, I put in air quotes, of the right-wing memes are really just that they're very rarely an accurate reflection of reality, and they're rarely specific enough critiques to even be interesting and end up just being plain mean most of the time.
I love it. Brilliant analysis. So let's zoom out a little bit. And Paul, I want to go to you. What changes around the world? What is changing around the world that we need to think about that's going to, if there's a through line to the recent panels that I've seen is our friend from Russia who was speaking about the way that democracy was subverted and the way the media was subverted. When it comes to, you've researched and published extensively around humor in Latin America. What are some lessons that your American friends can take from your findings?
Well, I always look at it the other way because I do feel like Latin American contemporary humor has been heavily influenced by U.S. trends and formats and comedians and satirists. However, they have always, as we have always done in Latin America, as I mentioned before, adapted that and created a hybrid product that addresses their own local realities, no? And I think that happens not only in Latin America, but everywhere in the world, no? I actually, one of the things that I think that whole process of how you adapt something that is global, something that is transnational, something that comes from a longer tradition to a reality and the needs of that people and that community, it's a very interesting process, no? So I guess maybe, I won't say what the U.S. needs to do in terms of satire, but the one thing that I would say about Latin America is that I do think that it's been a very interesting process to understand how something is adapted for a particular traumatic time. One of the things that I find in all my research is that the best satire has usually come out after traumatic historical periods. No, some of the best satire in Chile came after the Pinochet dictatorship. Some of the best satire in Argentina came also after the dictatorship or after the economic crisis of 2001. Some of the best satire in Peru came after Fujimori in the 90s. So I would say that there is usually, or in Mexico, after the government of the PRI of 71 years, in the opening and democratic reopening of the country. So I do think there is a direct relation between traumatic, repressive, awful times and a satirical reaction to them. Usually it does happen in democratic times, and usually satirists have always been targeted by those kind of repressive authoritarian times too. No? So that's, I always feel like satire has been a thermometer of democracy as journalism, but even I would say that satire even a little bit more, because usually with humor they have always pushed what could be said in public discourse and what is allowed and what is the line. And I do think in that sense satire has taken a really important role in establishing what the democratic conversation could be, what are the limits of that, no? So I don't know, maybe that applies here too.
If I can jump in again, we're already seeing that in the U.S. right now. I mean, not so much with all satire, but in the world, my tiny little window of political cartoons, and it's friends of mine that have stayed in the print world. I mean, you're already seeing that first. I don't know how many were here for the first panel, but people mentioned a couple times the weakness that comes if you're weak financially. So there were, one day, this was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. On one day, a news organization laid off, or a news chain laid off 3 political cartoonists across the chain. All 3 had won a Pulitzer Prize. And more recently, Ann Talnes basically resigned in protest from the Washington Post because they were afraid to run a cartoon of hers that criticized Bezos. So it's like we're in that subtle phase. And then, in my international friends in the political cartoon world, I mean, I know guys that have been thrown in jail and, people that have been hunted down and some people that have been killed. So it's, I'm looking forward to the post-Pinochet times.
Well, and I'm super curious, Sammy, Sarah, really, to Mark's point, we're 3 months into Trump 2. A lot of stuff certainly seems to be changing. What are your, respectively, top 1 to 3 existential fears about your profession?
I think that, in terms of danger, we're 99th on the list of things that are going to be affected. I think most people in this room are kind of ahead of us in terms of who's going to be affected, and you're probably all affected right now. So it's kind of hard to say, where I don't think that we pose enough of a challenge to the state to be affected. If we did, if this was a world where for some reason we were extremely well funded and there was a monetization strategy that just made us absolutely enormous, we would probably face some effects. But my existential fears are more about my friends, my dear friends who are marginalized, my trans friends, my immigrant friends. I am sure, we may be affected financially in kind of an indirect way, but yeah, I know that doesn't totally answer the question, but it's those are my concerns.
I think it's optimistic and telling that our 2 out of the 3 practicing professional satirists are not really all that worried, and you guys keep saying, well, we're not important enough for it to be a problem. I absolutely believe that you are. And the reason I'm much more pessimistic, I want to go back just to one more, this guy over. By the way, I'm sorry for the bad stock art here, but they're all clearly laughing at y'all's work in this photo. It's the frog. It's the frog. So for anyone who doesn't know, this frog was around the internet about 12 years ago, and it was seen as, just this funny mascot, and everybody kind of loved it, and everybody thought it was funny. We had a staff writer in 2015 who tried to get this tattooed on several occasions, and he was a young man of color. He was a member of the LGBTQ community. Great guy, and he almost got this flag tattooed. And then, somewhere around 2016, it became a symbol for neo-Nazis, and then it became a mainstream symbol of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And so it's the frog, and it's the way that it happened. Like, my takeaway as an editor of the Daily Dot since 2014 is that, like, men under 30 are really jacked up, really messed up, really traditional. There's evidence that shows that in Germany, South Korea, and the United States, for the first time in many generations, the men are getting much more conservative socially while the women get more liberal, so they get more isolated, and they play video games. And I think it's all video games. Does anybody remember the Gamergate scandal of 2014? Were you guys here for Gamergate? Basically, it was just like men harassing a woman over like a video game review. And it turned into a whole thing, and she was doxxed and harassed, and that's where a lot of the modern lexicon around this stuff became codified. Like, that's where we learned what doxing was, where you like get someone's public information. That's where we learned what swatting was, right? Where you call the SWAT team over to somebody's house as a prank. And so what I have observed is that if you were a teenager on the internet playing video games in 2014, you've grown up to become like a horrible person and are like angry and hate women. And I see that every single day reading the back end of the Daily Dot, reading the comments of the Daily Dot. So I'm a lot more concerned because I think the most recent election, like, I believe in my heart that if Vice President Harris was either white or a man, she would have won. But it was just pure anger from men who just didn't show up, men from the Latin American community who bent over backwards to come up with a reason to not show up and do the bare minimum. I think it's really just that simple. And I think it starts with satire, starts with what we think is funny being kind of like stolen and codified. And I think that's why, like, my personal take is just that Elon Musk is extremely powerful when he tries to be funny because he isn't funny, but he is really good at speaking that language. And it's the old South Park line of, they say that Trump kind of killed satire because for the first time when you made fun of the school principal, he would just turn around and give you the middle finger. And so it's become a lot more difficult to punch up because the right is so happy punching down. All right, let's keep on rolling. So I've sort of asked this question, but I am super curious. What is working for Reductress right now, Sarah? What is working? What is hitting? Where are the wins? Where are the, you edit some stories, you feel, man, this was a good week. What's a good day at Reductress for you?
It's weird because the good weeks always coincide with the bad news. The bad news always gives us lots of fodder to work with. So as you can imagine, the signal gate is one of many just gems that are equally hilarious as they are horrifying in like what it says about our reality right now. So that's, a good week. What's working is really just reacting to what's happening in the news. I think on the soft side of that, Reductress' kind of version of Area Man, I think that, much like the book that's there, conversations around productivity and work have really resonated with our audiences. I think people find just a lot of, especially since work has changed so much in the last 5 years, there's a lot to say about this new weird hybrid workspace, and that really resonates with people on a personal level. So I would say that it's those two things that people are really loving.
That's awesome. So it's the news, and it's what's relatable, and it's what's hitting right now. And what's relatable is work from home, hybrid work culture. That makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. Love it. And Mark, really same question. What does a good day at the office mean for you?
Currently, it's wandering around on the Stanford campus, but that's not going to last forever. So, no, for me, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a good day when it depends on the story. Like for me, it's like yes, I am somewhat of an ambulance chaser, but I try not to. I don't. It's more a bad day as a citizen can become a good day for satire fodder. That can be good, but honestly, back to what's going on this year, one of the things that I've been trying to do, I mentioned it briefly when I was showing my work, that to create the animation, it's a long, tedious process, and I've been able to speed that up a little bit because I've been working with some computer science geniuses at Stanford to at least incorporate some AI that's trained only on my work. So it's kind of this mad scientist phase that I'm in right now.
Well, I love that because that's fascinating. It makes sense, and again, that allows you to compete at the speed of content, and that's a fine segue for our next slide, which is the future of satire. And Paul, I want to start with you just real quick. You talked about we're at time, so we're gonna do this one in like 3 minutes. We got 3 minutes. Thank you. And first of all, Paul, I love that there's 2 Latin guys up here. It's really special. It's really nice. And I'd be remiss if I didn't do the thing. Anytime you see like some Latin American guys on a stage, they always do like the ¿Dónde están los puertorriqueños? ¿Dónde están los venezolanos? ¿Dónde están los mexicanos? So anyway, but okay. I had to do it. I'm sorry. And then usually there's like McDonald's somewhere. McDonald's is always sponsoring it. But what is coming next, Paul? You study this, you live it every day. What is coming next? What is the future of satire?
I actually really don't know. That's why I stopped. That's why I'm actually switching research topics. Well, actually, what I'm working on now, because I've done most of my research on the platforms that I thought were prevalent, like magazines, satiric television, national televisions and cable, digital satire, mainly audiovisual, so I haven't really focused on memes and stuff like that, but I do think that's very important. I'm actually now switching towards, and I do think relates to some of the stories that were mentioned that are relatable. I think that one of the post-pandemic things is people want more contact, more real experience, and I do think, for example, I'm doing some research in Peru about alternative stand-up, alternative political stand-up comedy. So I do think that kind of performance thing is actually, I do think it's getting a new space and some new dynamics that are happening. I do think that whole sense of, especially in these critical times, of creating community and not just digitally, but also through shared laughter in a physical space, I do think might have some sort of impact. Because, there's, especially in critical times, I do think that the effect of getting together and share that whole experience might gain some importance.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you just said it. What's the future of satire? People live, hanging out, trying stuff. I think you're absolutely right. Sarah, I'm curious though. We've talked about, okay, you're not super worried about kind of right-wing memes. You're not super worried about elected officials trying to be funny, or unelected officials who are now in charge of the world trying to be funny. But what about AI? And AI, one of you put the word slop into our group email thread, and that's the perfect word for it, because for those who haven't seen, everything on the internet now is like a weird AI joke. It's not even really a joke. It's just, here is a Navy SEAL as literally a seal, and they'll have like a big giant muscular seal. And what's the joke? It's not a joke. So how does Reductress rise above all of that junk that is now clogging the feeds as well?
I think it's just about being, again, specific in our critique of what's going on in the world, no matter what format that takes, whether it's short-form video or just a headline or what have you. I think that there's a possibility for AI-generated video to also be funny and good and incisive. I just feel like we're kind of at the stage where, like, the first like black and white film where a train goes by is in terms of like AI generated video. So most of it is crap. And putting aside all of the environmental issues and political issues with generating AI, I think somewhere down the road, there will be some interesting stuff made that we couldn't make anyway else. That could be cool.
Awesome. Okay, Mark, same question. What is the future of satire post AI? How do you adapt? How do you deal with these tools?
I think a lot of it, like if the world remains the way it is now, I think the future could be bright, but it's still a little nerve-wracking just to see where we are right now politically, how fast things are moving, at least in this country and in some others. So yeah, but I don't want to end on that pessimistic note. I think like what you were saying, Sarah, about because I'm kind of agnostic about AI. Like, I love it and I hate it. I don't know if that's agnostic or not, but either way, I love it and I hate it. Like, I basically want it to help me not have to be chained to the computer for as long as I've been chained to for 20-some years. So I'm looking forward to being more than just like a train zipping by, like you're saying, like something that's really cool that you couldn't do otherwise, which I'm experimenting with.
Awesome. Well, y'all, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, and we'll see y'all at the bar. Thank you so much.